Welcome guys to the second After Effects tutorial, and this tutorial is about the secrets behind frame rate in After Effects, and we'll be going off two concepts here. We'll be going off composition, which is guiding the viewer's eyes, layering animations and recreating depth. Then we're also going to be going a brief period over texturing. So to start us out, I have a few examples for you to see. So first I have this example from this project where you can see that this is guiding the viewer's eyes. So you can see that initially you look at the ball, but so because of the frame rate which of the loops which is much lower than the ball itself, your eyes tend to look down more to that, and leads to so you can guide your viewer's eyes to go from here to here so that the transition looks almost seamless and the viewers don't even notice it. Another example here, initially you look at the ball because it's the first thing you see in the first few frames, but as soon as you see the extremely framey pyramid, you just immediately look at it. You can't stop seeing how looking at it, which leads to a better transition between it. And as well as that, you can also use like frame rate to help recreate depth a little bit, due to, as you can see in the background, for example, the background objects, the really background object has the lowest frame rate of all of them, just so that you can tell, like if you look closely you can see something's happening, but it's not meant to be the mainstay, which is why that is so framey. So look like there's almost no changes. And then another composition where you can use this is layering your animations, like this one for example, this loop for example. There's a lot of animations going on at the same time, but you can layer them based on importance so that your viewer is not overwhelmed, for example, because when you see this animation, one of the first things you're immediately drawn to is this, simply because the frame rate is much lower than anything else being animated. So now the viewer has one place to go off of and they can expand their view from there. So from here you'd go to here, then you see the ball, then you see the rest of the outlines animating as well, just from having one initial starting point that you always have. Then another example, which is another example of layering, same animation here, but you have another object here to immediately look at right after the transition. And with this object, as soon as you see it, then you now look at the rest of the scene for what it actually is before the transition. And another example here, which is for depth. So you can see that from these, it's a lot of animations, and just to help give a sense of what you're supposed to be looking at more is with the outer ones, and they're framey enough that they catch your attention, but at the same time big enough that when you see them, like, you notice them, which is the main point of having them. Also, they're all in different frame rates, so that you go from the one you see first with the lowest, and then you gradually go in, so that it helps, like for example, it helps reduce the amount of downtime people notice on the square, for example, because when you look at this, you barely notice that the square is not animating because you're looking around it until the transition. Then I have another piece as well, not my work actually, but from Pacon. So this so this work, you can see that, for example, he's layering. So he has one thing which is normal frame rate, not normal, but the frame rate of his work, everything else. Then you have one thing which is way lower frame rate, which just helps differentiate the different objects in the scene. So it helps you like see what you have to look at first, because you see everything, then you immediately notice that this is spinning around in a different timing to everything else, and just because of that you tend to look at it more. And once again, it helps you not notice the downtime between the different animations. So you're looking at the spinning while everything is at a stop and moving to the next point, which is really smart motion design from him. And these are just for the composition, but texturing it's a whole different world. So for texturing, for example, it's mainly about textures. Usually it's really hard to get them right, like get the sweet spot on them, especially animated textures, because you don't want them to be too much, and at the same time you also want them to be noticeable. And unless the texture is the main subject of the scene, which for example this, it's really hard to get a difference between them. Like this example, you can see that the texture and the animation of this head, for example, is two completely different speeds, and this just helps bring out like what is really going on in the texture, because with so little frames you really get to see each individual one for what they are. You get to see each frame, see how much detail is in each one, which is an advantage of texturing with a low frame rate. And it also helps differentiate, so it helps with the texture stand out. Like it helps differentiate the object itself from its texture. And another example I have here, you can see the object itself is moving at its own frame rate, which is smoother, but the texture is moving at a much lower frame rate, but it's changing a lot, which basically means that you are so drawn to the texture that you don't even notice how little that the object is moving in itself, just because you're just looking at the texture, even though the scene goes on for a bit long, but you're just looking at the texture, so it doesn't feel like you've wasted your time looking at the scene waiting for the next thing, because you're still taking a look at the texture here, looking at the texture here, all that. So you can see. And for this tutorial, I have brought a demonstration animation that we will use a different frame rates to. I'll help explain like how you could implement it into your work. So I have this loop. So this is a loop I have. Now we're gonna do this step by step on how I would use frame rate to elevate this to the next level, for example. So we start off with a ball animating in, and then this, and then it coming out to an outer ring, and it's looping around the ring. So first of all, we have our main subject. We don't need to do anything about this. It's when we get the ring. Now there's two things to look at, and we have to figure out what do we want the audience to look at. What do you want the viewer to see? I want the viewer to see the ball. So if I want that, I would go to my ball, like let's say from here to here, between this transition at this point and this point. I want my viewer's attention not to go less towards the outer. I want it to stay on the ball. So with frame rate, how we could do that is we're going to get posterized time, which is the effect that I use. In order to get this effect, I work on 12 FPS. So now I would keyframe my posterized time to go. It's automatically a hold keyframe. You can't change it, so you have to do it step by step. I want to go 8, so 12, 8, 6, and I want it to end here. So I'll press Alt and left click on the rightmost after selecting all the keyframes and just drag it. So now the frame rate of the circle is so much lower that the audience just has to look at it. They are less. So if you look at this animation now, you're going to be less inclined to look at the outer, because you're like, why is the ball so framey? So it's like, oh, you don't see, like, you know that you don't see the outer as much. It's still there, but your attention is just a bit divided at the same time, like that. Then let's say over here to here, I want no more attention on the ball from this frame. So I want no more attention from here to here. So now I can come back to my posterized time, make a keyframe. Let's say I want 8, 10, 12 over here. 6, 8, 10, 12. But I want it to end here. So Alt left click furthermost. So that it gets back to normal keyframe. So normal frame rate at the end. So we go from high to low to high. Now let's say that I want the attention to go from the ball to the outlines here, the tunnel outlines. Let's say I really want the viewer to look at the outlines because I put a lot of work into it. Now let's go from where it starts, which would be here. Have the outline over here, this layer. I'll add my posterized time. So that's 12. Now let's say I want to go to, I don't want it to be as framey. So let's say I want to go from 12, 10, 8. So let's say I want to go to 8 FPS for the tunnel. So now I'll get something like this. Oh, mistake. Yeah. or maybe not 8, maybe let's try 6 instead. It really depends on how like the frame rate used, because if you don't use a proper frame rate, it may end up just making it look a bit worse, or it may distime it from the rest of the animation. So yeah, so let's say I want to keep it like this. I want it to be shaped like this, and I want the background to follow in the same frame rate. So I'll just copy these 2 keyframes and paste it on the yellow layer so that they follow the same timing like this. So if I play this, so now we have it going from the main focus, goes from the circle. So the main focus is a circle, but with no frame rates playing around. Then with 2 objects, we wanted to stay on the circle, so we reduce the frame rates of the circle. Now we wanted to go from the circle to the outline, to the tunnel. So we do that by reducing the frame rate of the tunnel, and we increase the frame rate of the circle like this. So now you're inclined to just look at the tunnel every single time. We can instead, for example, I can change this from 12, 10, 8, and 6 so that it's more gradual. Keyframe it, paste it on the other yellow layer. So now we'll get this. So that it's more like, it's a more subtle, a bit more subtle of a change. Even though it's still drastic, but subtle enough. So you get something like this. If you want as well, you can delay it. So let's say I want to delay it here. Here it's instead. Yeah, so let's say I have that. So circle, low frame rate circle to keep the eyes on the circle. Increase the frame rate of the circle, but decrease the frame rate of the tunnel, because I want the focus to be on the tunnel now. Now we get back to this, the next scene. So right now we've done guiding the viewer's eyes, and we've done layering a little bit as well, because we've layered some keyframe changes as well. Now we're on this part. This is where we'll move into more texturing. So I want the texturing of this ball to be very noticeable to the viewer. And there's 2 ways I could do this. I could so I have this comp. I could increase the speed of the texture moving around in a circle, which is just 2 layers, 2 gradients, 2 shapes, smeared, blurred, and then 2 layers of turbulent displays to get this effect. Now what I could do is I could increase the speed of the animation, but it might be too much, or I could reduce the frame rate of the animation itself. Let's say instead I want this to be 6 FPS. Now it looks like this when it's animating. So if I do this, it means that the sphere itself is animating in 12 FPS, but only the texture is animating in 6 FPS. So you get details like this, where it's like the texture is on a time lag, and it helps like just make it more noticeable that it's an animated texture like that. Now let's say, so yeah, I want the focus to be on the texture here. Now when these objects come in, I want the focus to be, so when they spin around, I want them to be the focus. So we can start them off with 6 FPS like this, and we'll wait for it to load. Yeah, so after then, if I want to, at this point I want the frame rate to increase, I'll go get my frame rates, 8, 10, 12, and then I'll copy this and paste them here. So yeah, let's say that now that these ones have come in, I also want the frame rates of these. Or let's say I instead want you to focus on just the black ones. So I'll go and find the black ones, which is these ones, and I would keep them at 12. Sorry, I want you to focus on not the black ones. I want you to focus on the yellow and the pink, since they're harder to see just by the fact that they blend more into the background. But the blacks are not as important. So I would do instead is that I would reduce the frame rate of the pinks, the pink and the yellows, and leave the frame rate of the black normal. So now you are looking way more at the pinks and the grays just because of how delayed they are than the blacks, because they look normal. And let's say that for this final zoom out, I want you to just beam your eyes at the center of the screen, just beam your eyes at this. I want you to see these going like a lot. So what I would do is keyframe my frame rates 10, 8, 6. So now every single object animating out is all on 6 FPS except for the animation of the sphere. The animation of the texture is at 6 FPS, but not the animation of the sphere. So at the end you'd get something like this. So you can see the big difference between at the start when you had just no posterized time and when you did. I'll put a comparison on screen right now so that you can really see the difference between the two. But you can see that like there's more purpose, like it feels like there's more character in the animation that has more frame rates. Like you can, like I said before, back to the first slide, like you can guide the viewer's eyes more, you can layer your animations more, you can create more depth by guiding the viewer's eyes more. And animating the textures, it can just help give you a next step in terms of how the texture animates and how the animated texture looks. That's really what this is really like the secret of frame rate in After Effects. You're not like limited to only one frame rate all the time, because there's a reason that like Spider-Verse, for example, is animated on 2s, 1s, 2s, different kinds of animation. There's all a reason to it, and some of the reasons include stuff like this where you can guide the viewer's eyes, etc. But if you do want to learn more about like frame rates and how you can use frame rates in your animation or your video editing or anything, I do actually have a case study on frame rates. I'll link it in the description. But if you check my website, if you check my Behance, there's a case study on frame rates. I'll link it in the description as well. But that's all for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.